welcome to another edition of the Hoosier Football Tailgate right here on thehoosier.com, powered by on3.com. Pleased to have you with us this evening in a preview night, so to speak, as we will look at the spring game happening tomorrow evening in Memorial Stadium at 8 o'clock. We'll take a good hard look at that with some of our the Hoosier.com experts, I should say, with Alec Lasley and Zach Browning going to be joining me here in a few minutes. We'll get a chance to sit around and bounce some things back and forth. You've got some things that have been happening already with this spring portal, as there has been some ground-shattering movement in the portal over the last few days, as we've seen, especially down at Tennessee. We'll talk a little bit about that, but more importantly, we're going to talk really about the spring game tomorrow evening, what that will all involve. I know Coach Signetti just looks at it as another practice, a little bit of good on good. How many snaps is Fernando Mendoza going to take? Who will take the second team snaps? Will it be Wilson, or will it be Alberto Mendoza? We'll get to that as we will take a look at that and get a very good look at what we can expect tomorrow evening out of that structure. Like I said, Alec and Zach will be joining me here shortly. They've been very busy, not with just some of the football stuff going on with recruiting, as Thursday night will be a big recruiting night. Some big name talent will be on campus, but also the basketball aspect of things is in full throttle. So those two guys have been quite busy with everything, and we'll get into that here in a few moments. Also looking at some things to update on with as it pertains to this NCAA settlement lawsuit that's still awaiting the final approval from the judge out there. I do know that both sides submitted some briefs as it pertains to some of the answers with everything per se with that. But one thing that did come out was that the court asked them to go back and look at a few things, such as roster size and things of that magnitude. Now, I do know that nothing was suggested on the roster sizes. So football will be, as of now, locked into 105 total bodies on the roster. And assuming there is no more walk-on category, which essentially means they will all be on some form of scholarship per se. Still awaiting to hear from some legislation bodies on that as it pertains to what that all means. But right now, that was one of the big things that came out of that was the 105-man roster and other roster sizes and limits were not altered in any way from the previous settlement agreement for the lawsuit. So that's a pretty big deal, because I know there had been some other suits in nature with some kids actually filed in order to have the roster limits not be affected, but it does look that will be affected. So we'll be looking here shortly for that all with that as it pertains to the NCAA and the settlement that may come about. I know that they're hopeful to get something in here within the next week or two, because all schools right now are acting as if it's moving forward and things of that nature. So I hope that we will get some hard, concrete, evidentiary stuff from the settlement. And then, of course, the NCAA and all the schools and how they're going to handle it, because it's going to be very, very new on both sides of the coin, because then you've also got NIL and how that may impact it, and how are they going to divide the money up that they're going to utilize from the television rights, which is somewhere in the neighborhood of I can't remember, 20 some odd million for each participating school that they will be able to divide up into everything. So we'll get that to you once we have. Just pay attention as well to the Hoosier.com for all your up to minute information. Today it was like bing, 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 bing with basketball and some of the other things that were coming on. So they got you covered over there. And it looks as if they'll still have you covered as well. We'll get into the spring game in terms of the details of it. I know, Jason, you've already asked a question here. Is it televised? No, they will not be televising the game. That was something they did last year, but they are not televising that this year. I know Ohio State was on, I believe it was Saturday, with their spring game. Was televised, but this year's spring game will not be. Also want you to bring you up to date on some of the stuff that I've been doing. The RPO offensive scheme that Indiana employed last year. I did an analysis on that with a breakdown video-wise. That is up and running as well. Don't forget, you've got that $1 subscription for the first month, and then 50% off for the rest of the year, as it pertains to the Hoosier.com and on3.com. So make sure that you're getting that, because you're getting a lot for very little. You can't beat that pricing, but the RPO analysis is up with video explanation of why, some of the integral parts of the run pass option, and in some case pass run option, because the Indiana did employ both, but that's all up and running as well. So make sure you're doing all that, and we're going to get Zach and Alec in here, and I'm going to try to do my best not to screw it all up, as we would say. And let's see, there we go. And one more in the room. All right. Can you guys hear? All right.
Yeah. How's it going?
Good.
I got you.
Gotcha. And as always, guys, if you get a little bit of echoing, let me know so I can adjust accordingly as we go through this tonight. But glad to have you along, Alec, and Zach as well. Spring game preview. We're almost 24 hours exactly away from the spring game. We know that it's not going to be televised with all that, but it, some of the Signetti's beliefs as it pertains to the spring game, it's kind of like, it's just another practice. It's not really a game, and we're going to go into some of the particulars here in a second. But how do you guys feel about that it's not a true game where you're having the true 4-quarter game per se, and with that, in terms of how SIG runs it, where it's just really going to be a regular segmented practice for them? I'll let you go first there, Zach.
Yeah, I don't have really any issue with that. I think it's just what Kurt Signetti likes to do. It's kind of been the new theme around college football with spring games. Some teams don't even have spring games. The goal of the spring for pretty much any team across the country is to get out of it healthy. And I think you just put yourself at too much of a risk. The jeopardy to injure somebody in some sort of freak accident is too high if you're playing a full game, semi-tackling, 4 quarters and whatnot. So I think half is a good blend of letting the fans who are in attendance, letting those who are in attendance, letting the media that'll be there to watch, letting them get some action, letting them see the team and where guys are playing, how guys look actually on the field in pads and whatnot. I think it's a good balance between that while also keeping everybody healthy, because that's the ultimate goal of the spring. You want to get everybody used to the situation. All the new guys come in, the freshmen, the transfers, you want to get everybody acclimated. But the main goal is to stay healthy. And the Hoosiers have done that so far a little bit. Tyler Morris, of course, went down with that season-ending injury at wide receiver in the slot. But for the most part, Indiana's done a good job of staying healthy, and that's probably why we only see a half of football tomorrow for the spring game.
Yeah, they don't even. I'm not even sure they'll tackle tomorrow. I wouldn't be a bit surprised if they just use the thud rule and not tackle to the ground. You're limited in how many practices you can have an actual takedown to the ground, but we'll let that be decided by Coach Sig and staff. Alec, how about you from your position there? Do you like having a 4-quarter game, or is it best as good just having what we've got employed, where you're just getting a segmented practice and a good maybe half of scrimmage?
Yeah, I mean, I think right, both would be great. If you can get a full game, that would have been awesome. But at this point in time, it's not worth it. Obviously, Zach touched on the injuries. That's the biggest thing that Indiana was able to overcome last year is no major injuries, and this year we've already seen right limping kind of through fall or through spring practice. With a couple kind of nagging injuries, and then obviously the Tyler Morris injury that sets you back in a pretty critical way. They're pretty thin in a couple different positions, and I think it's more or less let's get through the spring, let's kind of check that box. Obviously, there's been some ups and downs throughout the last couple of weeks, and Kurt Signetti talked about it. So I think it's more or less let's get through it healthy. Let's kind of cross off what we wanted to accomplish. Let's show the fans, what they can expect. But there's no reason to push it to the extreme when we all know nothing's going to, truly get accomplished tomorrow, and nothing's truly going to get accomplished until week one, if not even further into the season. So get the fans, happy and excited about this season. But that's about the extent that I think you need to go.
Another question here: are they more prone to injury, not taking hits early? It's injuries in tackle football are just, they can happen at any point in time, whether guys get rolled up, whether guys get, get a concussion from getting a big hit. And I think the biggest thing with spring ball and that is that you definitely want to get as good a look as you possibly can from an evaluation standpoint so the players are getting equally evaluated at all position groups. But at the same time, you want to have a positive outcome on both sides of the ball. And from that meaning both injury standpoint and actually playing standpoint, you'd like to have a good battle, but not one side overly dominating the other, which I think last year was, I guess what you could say that was pretty much it. It's interesting. Last year, Rourke actually did not play that well in the spring game, and Taven Jackson actually played pretty well. But to answer your other question there, Jason, yeah, we will be having a post game analysis as of right now. Now that I'll say this, I'll let Jim Coyle make the final announcement on that. So as of right now, we are planning on it. A couple things here, pregame processions and stuff. They've got a big marketing thing going on with this as well, which I thought was unique as that I've not seen Indiana do for a spring game before, which I think is really neat. They got some giveaways starting at 7 p.m. Rally towels available at all entry gates. Of course, it's free parking and free no admission to get in. Your guys' take on that, Alec, that Indiana's going a little bit from a marketing standpoint, putting an effort into trying to get people there, because it's always a tough thing, especially on a weekday night at 8:00. That's not the best, but they're trying to get people there with giveaways and things of that nature. Kind of what is your thoughts on everything that you've seen from that standpoint, marketing wise?
Yeah, I mean, it just goes into the fact that this program wants to generate excitement. They want to generate more talk, and especially after the season that they did last year, you need to continue to ride that for as long as you can. Whether that's getting new people into the stadium that haven't been there before, whether that's bringing in new fans that maybe have never really been around the program or even in Bloomington. Anything that you can do to continue to establish that culture from a fan base perspective that was built last year. Again, we remember the very first game of the season last year where after the game, some of the players, and then obviously Kurt Signetti called out the fan base for leaving at the half, right? And then we see
Right.
what the fans in the stadium turned into about halfway into the season, and the remaining 4 or 5 home games. So you want to continue to ride all of that momentum, and you want to be able to continue to keep that excitement through the summer, through obviously the rest of the spring here, and then getting into fall camp, because obviously there's so much excitement after December, and you turn the chapter really quick into spring practice. So there's really no kind of dead period, and then you get into after the spring. Now there's a couple months of really not a lot of true excitement because there's just not a lot going on. Obviously, you get the new guys who weren't on camp or weren't on campus in the spring that'll show up. But from a true fan perspective, right, this is really the one and only time that you get to see this team until week 1. So you got to do as much as you can to generate that excitement.
Yeah, I'm glad they're trying to do something in that arena, as well as trying to sell season tickets. That's another thing that it gives it an opportunity to swing for the fences, is with getting season tickets and sold and things of that nature. Same thing from your perspective, Zach. Have you seen at any given time at Indiana where there's been this much push in terms of the marketing of a spring game, not just to the general public, but even the student body?
Yeah, and I think that's really where the biggest draw is coming from. I think obviously we saw the study later towels, the shirts that were handed out to the student section last season. I think part of Kurt Signetti's mission since coming over from James Madison and coming to Bloomington is to not only get the fan base as a whole re-energized and energized for football, but specifically get the student body energized. And I think that's something. It's a Thursday night kick. Some students have Friday classes, not all, but I think it's a Thursday night kick, 8 to 8-ish o'clock. So I think that is kind of a draw for students. I think all the marketing, the merchandise, a student here at IU loves a shirt, loves a rally towel. So having those, I think, really appeals and adheres to that student body as well. And I think that's really the Kurt Signetti kind of way of going about things. He really wants to connect with the students because he knows how much not only the students drive the football team and drive attendance in that student section, but also just around Bloomington. The students are a large part of the community, a large part of Bloomington in general. And I think Kurt Signetti and this Indiana football program really want to drum up that excitement and that buzz, not only in the fan base as a whole, but specifically amongst the students. And I think that's what the spring game will be. I think it'll be a little bit more festive than it has in past years. I think those kind of giveaways with the towels, the shirts, whatnot, everything with that, the merchandise, the advertising and whatnot, I think that's to adhere to the fan base, yes, but specifically to students, because Kurt Signetti, we've seen him already. It's been a year and a half now, and he loves to reach out to those students. He loves the involvement from the students, and I think that's what this spring game will be for.
Yeah, and I know one thing, he's endeared himself into the student body, did a lot last year as it went to even actually sending out an email to all the student body in terms of asking them for their support, and they showed out. And as the season went on, the trot over to the fields across the street there, where everyone is accustomed to been going the last few years, kind of subsided, and everybody stayed in the seats. And that was an experience that I don't think any Indiana player has overly experienced in their time. The guys there playing have seen. And even in the Purdue game, when we had the worst weather you could possibly imagine for a game on a night game with the weather and stuff, the amount of people in the stands that night was overly impressive. So that in itself has been pretty good. And I agree with that. I do think this is a chance for them to do a lot of groundwork, laying the groundwork for next fall and getting the excitement there. One thing, just as a note, they're asking fans to use gates 2, 4, and 12 when arriving, and RV parking will be available at gate 11. So 2, 4, and 12 for your gates of utilization, and then if you're bringing an RV, come in. You got gate 11 available from Indiana's athletic department there as well. Now the other thing. With all this, hopefully we get good weather. And weather right now hasn't been the greatest. Last year's spring game, I think it was about 85 in it was really humid. That's all I remember from that game from last year. But you know, the uniqueness to this game is, and this is one thing when you're having these inter squad scrimmages, is how do you keep score? And you know, we're gonna get into the scoring component here in just a second. What have you guys thought about what has been transpiring within the NCAA college football ranks, where Colorado and Deion Sanders was actually trying to have a quote unquote game between Syracuse, where Syracuse would have flown out to Colorado. They would have had a couple of days of practicing against each other, and then it would have ended with them playing a quote unquote game on Saturday, and kind of the NFL model per se. What is your guys' take on that? Is that something you think would go in college football for having something like that when you think about fan involvement? Or you alluded to this earlier, Zach, is it worth the possibility of having some major injuries doing all that, considering you may not have tackled that much and you've only gone through 16 practices and it's not consecutive days? So what's your guys' take on having a actual true spring game, Alec?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a need for that, right? We just talked about the emphasis of getting through the last portion of spring practice healthy, number one. But number two, the last thing, I guess the first thing that these kids want to do is actually hit, right? They've gone through a lot of practices now against each other. They've gone through a lot of practices where they haven't been able to actually tackle. So the first thing that they're going to want to do is, if they're playing another team, they're going to want to take a shot at them. And that's the last thing that you want at this point in the spring. And you see it all the time with these joint practices at the NFL level, where at some point during one of those joint practices, there's always a fight that breaks out. Doesn't matter how long the practice has lasted, where, at what point, which teams are involved. There's always something that's going to go on, and that's the one thing that when you are playing as a team, just an inter squad scrimmage here, you're not going to go 100% because you don't want to injure the other person, and
Right.
you don't have that same mindset if you're going against another team, especially at this point where they want to start hitting. They've been kind of really going at it hard for the last 3-4 weeks, and that's the last thing I think any team would want, especially a team that has pretty high aspirations to not only compete, in the top three, right, of the Big Ten, but also, still has a roster that can compete for a college football playoff spot. And one or two more injuries is obviously all you need to turn a 10-11 win season into a 7-8 win season, and that changes things drastically from just a national perspective of where this team could go. So definitely not anything I think you should ever do.
Yeah. You look at it from a greedy standpoint. I guess it could be a big fundraising type of scenario for NIL, because that's kind of how that was being pitched out in Colorado, was splitting the gate between Colorado and Syracuse and that money going to the NIL. Zach, anything from your perspective?
Yeah, I think Alex said it great. It's also just a point of, you mentioned the NIL, but at this point, these players are way too valuable to risk getting hurt in a situation like that. If you're a star quarterback and you roll out and land on your foot wrong, or something crazy happens, some kind of non-contact injury, you're losing out on a lot of NIL there. You're losing out on the year of playing college football. So I think these players at this stage, with the money that they're making from NIL and from that kind of stuff, these players are too valuable. The cons far, far, far outweigh the pros for this type of thing. It works maybe for somebody like Deion Sanders, like Colorado, in that kind
Yeah.
of market, with the attention that they like to bring upon themselves. But I think for Curt Cignetti, who's a little bit more of a business-oriented approach and a mindset as far as things go, I don't think it would even drum up that much more hype around Bloomington. I just think the spring practice, as it is right now, does enough to get fans excited, get some eyes on the team. I just think these guys are way, way too valuable at this point, as far as NIL is concerned, to risk themselves getting injured in a meaningless spring game.
Yeah, and just note here, if you have any questions, by all means, we'd like for this to be participatory. If you have a question, by all means, feel free to put it in the chat box if you can, and we'll try to throw it up on screen and give you an answer one way or the other. But wanted to pass that along and make sure that we get that communicated. Seek and Jason, are there clauses with NIL? If not, should there be? Well, there's no clauses now, Jason, that I know of as it pertains to certain terms and certain things that an athlete would have to do. It's pretty open-ended. Will there be? Yes, there's going to be, because it's going to get to the point where you just can't give the athletes all the cards per se and just decide all of a sudden, hey, I want $4 million, and if you don't give it to me, I'm leaving, type of deal. But he signed for a 2-year period when he first came there, and it's only year one. So we're going to see some of that eventually. I think once the settlement actually gets the rubber stamp per se, I do think that's what a lot of things have been going on in the background, is to do some of that type of stuff to have a little bit more formal type of situations rather than the wild, wild west that we seem to see. And it's already happening right now. There's several guys already in the portal, and we'll kind of get to that here in a little bit. Scoring system, as we talked about, it's not a traditional game, so you're not playing an opponent and stuff like this, but you got to give the defense a chance to earn some points. Otherwise, they're going to complain. But a touchdown for offense is a 6-point deal. Extra point is 1 point. And then field goal is a 3 point. So you get 6 points for a touchdown. Extra point is 1. And then if you get a field goal, it's 3. Defensively, they get their points from turnovers gained, which is a 4-point situation. If a defense gets a stop and punt and force punt, that's another 3 points. And then, of course, if they would get a safety, that would be 2 points. Now, if they would score a touchdown by intercepting the ball, they get 6 points. And I do want to think, if memory serves me correctly, they get like 4 points on top of that and even a stop. So the defense has ways to score in this game, and they're not just out there as a rogue unit going against the offense. So they do keep it a very competitive situation to allow the defense to be heavily involved. And last year was actually a pretty good game, as the score was pretty tight once that we got down towards the end of it there. But one thing with spring games as well, and kind of talk about the next subject that I wanted to quote unquote get into with this, is maybe some of the things that you guys are looking for specifically out of certain position groups, or a specific player that you've kind of got your eyes on. I know that Zach, I think you had something out the other day talking a little bit about the storylines here and there. But I guess the first thing, that's pretty obvious, I think we're all interested to see, how Fernando does as the heir apparent behind the center. And then, of course, what they have depth-wise at the quarterback position, whether it's Grant Wilson or Fernando's brother, Alberto. I'm interested to see if we see some things from Fernando that we're not accustomed to seeing in a Shanahan offense. And that may be something with the quarterback having more specific design within the offense that they didn't have a year ago. But what's your all's take on that? Or what is your thought process, Zach, as it pertains to the quarterback position? Because the one thing that concerns me outside of Fernando being a first year, still having a couple of years left, is the fact that they're not very deep at that position. And it could become very, very thin, because you've already lost Tyler Cherry for the entire year. And you've got Wilson, who's a transfer, and then of course Alberto's the most experiences of the group because he's got 2 years in the system. What is kind of what are you looking for that position in that regard?
It'll be interesting. We've seen Fernando Mendoza throw. He's thrown at spring practice so far. He threw at pro day as well. We know that he has a good arm. We know he can put the ball pretty much anywhere he wants to, anywhere within 60 yards. He's got the cannon, he's got the arm. I think it'll be interesting to see how he reads the defense. I think that'll be one of the keys for Mendoza going forward as he kind of develops further in his first year at IU. I think it'll be interesting to see how he reads that defense, what kind of his reads and thought process throughout a play is. I'm also interested to see how his mobility operates. I think that'll be one of the keys for Indiana this season. Obviously, Curtis Rourke was playing on that torn ACL last year, so I think it'll be interesting to see if Mendoza's mobility, which already was a little bit more useful than Rourke's was, I think it'll be interesting to see if Mendoza's used a little bit more outside of the pocket, if there's more designed plays to get him outside the pocket, maybe even he just runs in a design type of run situation. As far as the depth goes, I think Alberto will be fine. I think, of course, he's been with Curt Cignetti for a couple of years now. I think Grant Wilson is that guy, though. He has experience. That guy's been playing college football for the last 4 or 5 years at this point, so he has the experience. And, of course, you're going into the season next year and in the fall for the Hoosiers. Plan A is to have Fernando Mendoza start. There is no plan B. You go into a season without hoping you have to go to a backup quarterback. So while Indiana may be concerned about its depth, you hope you never have to use that depth if you're Curt Cignetti and the Hoosiers. But I do think, Alberto, he's shown flashes, he's shown promise. He was a guy that was originally committed to Curt Cignetti at JMU. They've been close with each other for a long time. And of course, you look at Grant Wilson, I think he's got the experience for a younger quarterback group. I think Wilson is a guy that you could look at and say, in an emergency, if you have to have a guy step in, you've got a guy with 4 or 5 years of college experience. I think Grant Wilson's kind of that type of guy that can steady the ship. He probably doesn't have that high of a ceiling at the quarterback spot as far as developmentally moving forward, but I think that floor is high enough to where you can still do some quality things with him out there given his experience.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see Grant and Alberto share series as they go through this tomorrow night. But last year it was pretty much Curtis Rourke and Taven, and that was it. We didn't see a lot of the young pups, but I do think we'll see both those guys pretty realistically sharing the duties with that second unit and maybe the ones. How about you, Zach? Anything? I mean, Alec, and from your perspective with the quarterbacks.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be interesting to see what obviously you had a story on it today, but what the RPO game looks like, right? I mean, we had no mobility from Curtis Rourke last year. So the RPO game was obviously very much dedicated to the running backs running the ball. I think you're going to see a lot more of maybe those options with Fernando Mendoza running the ball, with still the option right for any of the wideouts there. But I think we're going to see a lot more of him running it, whether they're designed runs or just having the ability to have that as one of his reads and utilizing that, because that was not one of the areas that Indiana was able to really utilize. We saw it a little bit with Taven Jackson, right, because of his athleticism and his quickness and just overall mobility. But again, it just goes back to the fact that Indiana was that explosive with a quarterback that really could not move. Just shows you how effective this offensive system can be. Obviously, you have a lot of new pieces there at the running back position. Obviously, Roman Hemby's still a guy who was extremely successful in the Big Ten before. So it's not like you're really going to be losing a lot from that perspective. But to see kind of how that rotation at the running back position works out, and specifically where those designed runs are going to come into place, because I think that was really the only thing missing from Indiana's offense last year. And if you're able now to kind of replicate and really exploit the defense that way, we heard Elijah Surratt talk about it. I think maybe 2.5 weeks ago that for the most part he even thinks this offense is further along than last year.
Mm-hmm.
That tells you a lot with how many new pieces are in that offensive unit, especially the quarterbacks and the running backs, which were the key components of a lot of that explosiveness last year. So if you can add in a little bit more of that rushing ability, I think it just really opens things up for what this team can do explosive wise offensively.
Yeah, I think it's great that you've got year 2 under Coach Shanahan with a lot of these guys, and I think it's going to be a interesting dynamic to see how far are they along and what they've added to it. You touched on some of the other position groups. For me, with the rest of the offensive unit, kind of interesting to see how BB Jr. runs. I mean, Hemby and Black to me are your two tough backs, and Hemby's got the speed to go the distance. And then when you kick it outside the wide receiver position, another group a little thin. Perhaps that's another area that they go look for a guy in the portal here in a week or two from that standpoint. And then the offensive line, I'm interested to see how Coogan fits into that. What's your take on that as well, Alec?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one difference in this running back room that I think should be exciting for a lot of fans is they all have a much better ability to catch the ball out of the backfield and be
Yeah.
moved out in different spots than what we saw with obviously Tyson Lawton and Justice Ellison last year, where they were two backs that were really limited in the pass catching game. Obviously, Roman Hemby and BB both had 30 catches every single season at the college level at least. And then Kalen Black had, I think, 30, not last year, obviously, but 2 years ago at JMU. So these are guys who can be very explosive and stretch the defense in ways that the running backs weren't able to do last year. So I don't know if you're probably not going to have the same explosiveness running the ball, but I think what they're going to be able to do catching the ball is going to far exceed what this running back room did last year. So that's what I think really intrigues me out of this group. And then I think the big question is Mekhi Jackson, right? Is he going to be able to really step up now with the loss of Tyler Morris? I think you're definitely going to see Kurt Cignetti in Indiana go into the transfer portal and pick someone else up because they're one injury away from being very, very thin at that position that's already thin. And even if Tyler Morris was there, I think you would have seen some sort of an addition because as talented as EJ Williams can be and what that potential could be, we've now seen him for 2 straight years be extremely limited with injuries, and that's not a guy that
Yeah.
I think you can rely on as a third wideout in an offense that likes to rotate 4 or 5 guys that we saw last year at that position. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what Jackson can do in that position. Hopefully, I think you get a room that obviously is going to be extremely talented at the top end with Surratt and obviously Omar Cooper, but still a lot of question marks about the depth of this group overall and if they can live up to what is probably the most dangerous word in sports, and that's potential. It's a very scary word, and I think that this wide receiving room has a lot of that, but just still a lot of questions about how they fit in.
Yeah, and I'm anxious to see Charlie Becker as well because I know that he's a kid that's coming up through the system, kind of one of those foundational guys. I know that Sig spoke of him a week ago maybe about how impressed he was with him and how much he liked him. So I look for him to see what he does out there on Thursday as well. Let's flip over to the defense here, Zach, and give you first crack at it there. But you look at this defense, we're going to work with the secondary first because I'm pretty excited about what's there coming into the fray that have added to just D'Angelo's prospects that he has as a corner because he's a legit guy. But now you add Lewis Moore back into it, Gundy. Kind of what's your take on that secondary? And I do think they have some depth.
Yeah, I really like the secondary on paper going into the year for Indiana. Of course, there's still plenty of room for additions. The portal still open, still plenty of room and opportunity for Indiana to add even further in the secondary. But what stands out to me is when we've gone to spring practice so far this year compared to last year, these guys are just bigger. And that was something that Kurt Signetti noted. I asked him after the Notre Dame game. I was like, what's the biggest difference between a team like Indiana and a team like Notre Dame or Ohio State or one of those top tier college programs? And he said, A, depth, which Indiana's done a good job of addressing this offseason, but B, just the physical size. When you recruit a 4 or 5-star, those guys are just bigger than 3
Mm-hmm.
stars. That's one of the big reasons they're 4 stars or 5 stars, not 3 stars. And Indiana has those bigger guys, especially in that secondary. You look at Rylan Gandy, that dude's arms are as long as I've ever seen when he's out there. Byron Baldwin's a true freshman. Ciante Stewart's a true freshman. I said it earlier or yesterday actually in our boards after spring practice. Those two do not look like true freshmen. Those guys are as big, if not bigger, than everybody else in the defensive back room. Of course, we've got D'Angelo Pond, sizes and everything. He's the smallest guy in the defensive back room, but he's also an All-American. Safety is another spot where it'll be interesting to see how they rotate that out. Amari Farrell will likely get shots at Rover, but he's kind of been working out with the safeties. Obviously, Rover is more of a safety-like position. You've got Boykin from NC State. You've got Lewis Moore, who's back. Obviously, he's familiar with Indiana, but not familiar with this Indiana team. So I think the secondary as a whole, there's some high expectations. Of course, last season, the secondary wasn't the strength of the defense. The defense didn't
No.
necessarily have a huge weakness, but the secondary might have been the weakest part of a really, really strong defense overall last season. And I think Chris Signetti, Brian Haynes, the defensive coordinator, I think this defense has the potential somehow, because last year's defense was so good statistically, to be even better, if not, or on par, if not better than last year's defense was. And I think that starts with the secondary. You've just got guys that are bigger guys. And I think you can't underscore how important just physical size is, especially in the secondary when you're going up against some of these receiver rooms like Ohio State has, like Penn State figures to have this season, Oregon. Those teams have big guys in their receiving corps. So I think you have to have the talent, you have to have the skill, but you can't teach size. And Indiana's got some guys that are big, long, strong, athletic, quick in the cornerback and safety room this season.
Yeah, like I said, I'm pretty excited with them because a year ago, coming out of that spring game, that was probably one of the biggest question marks heading into the summer, was that secondary, because it was, like you said, a little shy of where they needed to be in that regard. Alec, let's jump up to the guys in the trenches there defensively. You lose Carpenter, CJ West, who's had a phenomenal year coming over from Kent State. Probably going to be playing on Sunday somewhere because he's overly impressed the NFL scouts. You got Tucker, and I can't remember the kid's name from Western Kentucky right now. Coming in for D-line, but it sounds like it's going to be a pretty decent D-line. And then don't forget, Kamara's moving to the stud backer position, where there's a little bit more flexibility in what they can do with him. They can put his hands in the ground to get a 4-man front, or stand him up and utilize him in many different ways in their blitz sequence and stuff. What's your take there with those guys up front?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, it's extremely difficult to replace the production from Carpenter and CJ West, two guys that not only filled a lot of holes and had a pretty diverse and versatile skill set, but also demanded a lot of attention, and that opens up a lot for the rest of that pass rush, even going back to any pass rushers at the linebacking position, right? So I think that all in all, I think the defensive line is going to be okay. I'm not too worried about that. I mean, you have Wheeler coming in from Western Kentucky. You have obviously Kamara, who's going to be kind of moving around. I'm more concerned about what the production is going to be from the linebackers, right? You have Elijah Hardy. You have obviously Caden Turner, and then you have. Why am I blanking? Obviously, he was coming back from last year, but you have three really talented players at that position, but the depth is nowhere to be found. Obviously, Aiden Fisher, who I was blanking on for a second there, but those are three guys that I think you're going to be able to rely on. But after that, there's really nothing that Indiana has at that group that's going to be able to produce at any sort of level. You obviously have some young freshmen, but I think that's going to be the biggest question mark for Indiana in this defense, right? They had depth at that group last year. They had production last year, and I just don't know if they're going to be able to sustain the same amount of whether they're just kind of knick-knack injuries or just even a little dip in production. The back end of that pass rush needs to be able to deliver, regardless of how deep and talented the secondary is. And I think the linebacking group is just one major concern for me, as opposed to last year. I think the front line and then the back line of the defense is going to be almost better than it was a year ago. But if you just don't get the level of production, or if you even have a little bit of a dip in production from a Caden Turner or from a guy like Elijah Hardy, those are two guys that you're relying on a lot for now. Whereas last year, right, you got ample production out of Hardy that you were not expecting. Now that's expected, and if he does have a little bit of a dip, where's that extra production going to come from? Because Aiden Fisher is obviously going to shoulder a lot of that load, but you need to make sure that there's a couple other guys there that can rotate through, that still have the versatility in both the pass rush and dropping back in coverage. And I just don't think they have that right now. And I think that's going to be a major concern if they're not able to pick up at least one or two guys here in the spring window that just opened up today.
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit there before we end tonight about the portal and kind of what that comes to. But you hit on the two topics that or areas, I should say, one being the linebacker position. Walker, who was a terror on the field and a ton of productivity that you have to replace. There's no question you got one of the best back there with Aiden Fisher coming back, and what he brings to this defense, not just as a player, but leadership alone. And who's going to be his next dynamic duo beside him. That's going to be an interesting dynamic that goes into all this. Then my biggest question after that, and come to you here, Zach, as well on these two, but you got a tight end room that's going to miss Horton. And I tell you right now, people don't realize how much they're going to miss Horton, not because he was some, guy that ran out and caught a lot of passes last year, but just the point of attack blocking that he brought to the table. They're going to sorely miss that. And whether or not Nowinski and Holden States, and I think that's right, States, are they going to be able to fulfill what Horton was on top of it? And, they just lost a tight end again today who's going into the portal. Whether or not he's any type of big loss or not, we'll see. But kind of what's your feel there with the two positions, linebacker, and then, of course, we'll finish up with the tight ends for tomorrow.
Yeah, I think Aiden Fisher is going to need some help, and it's really, really difficult to figure out a way to replace what Jalen Walker had, not just the production, but he knew how to play alongside Aiden Fisher. He knew how to play in Bryant Haynes' defense. Not that some of the guys that are coming back from last year's team don't. You look at a guy like Isaiah Jones, Jeff Utzinger, some of the freshmen too, PJ Nelson, I think Indiana likes. He's got a bigger frame, more athletic in that linebacker core. But Elijah Hardy, he's another guy. There's guys, but nobody is going to be able to single-handedly replace the production and replace what Jalen Walker was able to do last year. Jalen Walker was a freak athletically. He could do anything. If you needed him to go be a cornerback for a play and cover a wide receiver in coverage, he's your guy. He's got you. If you need him to rush the passer, get around a big 300-pound offensive lineman, he's your guy. He can do that. He was so versatile, and I don't think Indiana necessarily has a single player in that linebacker core that can do that. I think collectively maybe they're a little bit deeper. Elijah Hardy's got that another year of experience. Isaiah Jones has another year of experience. They're a little bit deeper and more talented from a freshman standpoint this year. But as far as top-end talent, nobody's going to be able to match Jalen Walker. Maybe Indiana goes into the portal, finds a partner in crime for Aiden Fisher this year. On the other side of the ball, tight end is one of those areas I'm kind of circling. I would be surprised if Indiana doesn't go out and find some help in the portal at tight end. I think that Holden Stays and Riley Nowakowski, you've got two guys that can do what you need to be done at tight end, but they do it as two separate players. Of course, last year you got pass catching and run blocking from Zach Horton. This year you'll get pass catching from Holden Stays, you'll get run blocking from Riley Nowakowski, but neither are really going to dip too deep into the other aspect and the other trait that really you need to be a well-balanced tight end. So I think it'll be interesting to see what Curt Cignetti and Indiana do at the tight end spot, because Zach Horton, not only just what he meant on the field, but off the field as well. He was a leader in that locker room. He was an extension of that offensive line. And again, while Riley Nowakowski could be that extension of the offensive line, I don't think he has the pass catching capabilities that Horton had last year. And while Holden Stays may have those pass catching capabilities, he doesn't have the ability to block. Tight end is one of the more important positions in Curt Cignetti and Mike Shanahan's offense. We saw it a couple of years ago. Zach Horton put up great numbers, not only receiving the ball. Last year, he was fantastic. The running backs raved about him. The offensive line raved about him helping out in that run game. So I think out of those two positions, linebacker is a little bit concerning, because obviously you're not going to be able to replace Jalen Walker's production, his talent, his speed, his versatility. But I'm a little bit more confident in what Indiana has at the linebacker spot than I am the tight end spot. And I wouldn't be surprised if Indiana goes and gets some help in the transfer portal at both spots, but specifically at the tight end spot.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. And I do think you're probably going to see some more 3-receiver, 4-receiver set to kind of compensate for what they may lose from the tight end position overall. So it'll be interesting to see there. Again, 8 o'clock tomorrow night, Memorial Stadium, a lot of fun. Going to have, I think, a pretty decent crowd if the weather's good, and then a lot of festivities as well happening in Memorial Stadium. Again, if you guys have any questions specifically for us or Zach or Alec, by all means put it in there and we'll try to get it answered. And I think we had one of them here. Hopefully the longer and get stronger. And yeah, I think our D line is definitely going to be bigger. And I do think they'll be okay up front, because Indiana stopped the run last year, not just by the defensive line, but a utilization of blitzing and angling and slanting their line. And I just think that they'll continue to do that with Bryant. And I do think he has many different ways to attack an offense, or at least he showed last year he could. And that's why they were as good as they were. Outside of Notre Dame's 99-yard touchdown run, they pretty much shut Notre Dame, for the most part, down for a better part of that game. So we'll see what all happens. You, Alec, alluded to the portal, and it's coming open, and there's guys already jumping in it, one being the Tennessee quarterback. I'm not going to try to speak his name because I will definitely butcher it. Before we came on tonight, it looks like he's going to land with Tino out at UCLA. Now, there's no way they paid him $4 million. No way. And I've never seen a kid so badly represented by whoever thought they could do what they were going to do at Tennessee and put a kid in a situation like that. It's just a travesty. And, but it looks like UCLA is going to get them from that perspective. But, you know, Indiana's got some guys in it already. Nothing of overly significant, I guess you would say, from my perspective at this moment in time. And I don't anticipate it. But I think we all have alluded to it. What is that position or positions that you think Indiana must go get somebody? Because of injury threat, depth, and all that. And, you know, is there anybody that pops off that's in the portal right now that you can think of? Alec, we'll start with you on this one as well. But what is that one position or positions you think Indiana has to get somebody out of the portal again?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go back. I still think, right, we talked about the linebacking position. We talked about the tight end position. Again, I still think, someone needs to be added to that wide receiver room, because I don't think you can fully trust and put a lot of responsibility on EJ Williams, because one injury away from really limiting what you can do offensively. And with the assumption, right, they bring in a tight end because as Zach noted, that is one position that absolutely needs to be covered here in the next couple of weeks. But even if they do bring someone in, it's most likely not going to be a Zach Horton type player, right?
Mm-hmm.
That production and that leadership and the knowledge of the offense is not going to be able to be duplicated from what he brought to that team last year. And that's going to be now a position that's going to be a committee, right? It's not going to be a Zach Horton-esque player who's going to be able to demand that much attention. So I think it's going to put a lot more value on having a very productive slot receiver. Doesn't need to be a super, high rep kind of guy, but it needs to be able to be a rotational piece that can go in there and provide something of value when some of these other guys need a couple reps off. Because Mike Shanahan talked about it last year. Obviously, Kurt Cignetti talked about it. Even the wide receivers talked about it. That they are always fresh because of how quickly and how many reps are rotated through with multiple different players, and they just don't have the depth at that position right now. With a probably more explosive passing attack, what it could be with what Fernando Mendoza can bring to this team, I think that's extremely important. And then I still think, again, at the linebacker position, obviously, we talked about what can't be replicated with Zach Horton, can't be replicated with Jalen Walker. And I think Zach brought up a really good point that he knew exactly how to play alongside at that position, right? And Aiden Fisher demands a lot of attention from an offense, but also demands a lot of attention from his defensive counterparts. And you need to have someone who can fill that role of that kind of Robin next to him. And I just don't think there's a way to fully replicate that. I do think you probably have maybe overall a little bit more depth, but I think the production is just still something that needs to be filled, and more so the versatility, I should say, right? Because of how versatile Jalen Walker's skill set was. I don't think, again, you're not going to be able to replicate that because of how much of a freak he was on the field. But I think they need to be able to find someone who can be equally as effective in the run game and the pass game, that they can slot in there and provide some sort of effectiveness and production throughout the season.
Yeah, and just a couple of things here before we come to you. There's Zach. A couple big guys, I guess, are, in my opinion, Austin is it Barnett or Burrett? Offensive lineman from, played a lot last year. He's in the portal, and Sam West is the tight end that's in the portal as well. He played a little bit last year. So that's what you have there. You got to be strong up the middle. There's no question about that with everything. And, Sam West jumping in the portal stings a little bit because he's a depth guy, and that hurts. But from your perspective there, Zach, what is that room for you?
Yeah, I'm going to echo what Alex said, and I'm going to lump the two groups together, wide receiver and tight end, and just say Indiana needs to go out and not get just one, but multiple pass catchers probably. It doesn't necessarily need to be a wide receiver. It doesn't have to necessarily need to be a tight end, but they need guys that can catch passes, for lack of a better way to put it, whether that's a tight end, whether that's a receiver. Indiana needs help there, not only just talent-wise. I think the talent is good. We've talked about the talent with guys like Elijah Surratt, Omar Cooper, Holden Stays. I think Riley Nowakowski, those guys are good. You just need depth. This is a long season, and as we've talked about a little bit, Indiana likes to rotate in a lot of guys. Whether it's a tight end, whether it's a slot guy, I think Mekhi Jackson probably has the slot position lined up for him right now. I also wouldn't be surprised if maybe EJ Williams. I know he doesn't fit the typical prototype of a slot receiver. He's 6'4" and 200 pounds. EJ Williams is, but I think playing slot would be a little bit less stressful on his body. He's not necessarily running full speed in a straight line, 40 yards down the field or across the middle, taking big hits like that. He can be a little bit more of a finesse guy at the slot, so maybe that helps him stay healthy. I think we could see him in the slot a little bit more this year. He's got the route running ability to do it. He's got the quickness to be able to do it despite his size. And obviously 6'4" in the slot, that's a matchup nightmare. You have to walk a safety down to cover him. No nickel corners, no slot corners is going to be able to cover EJ Williams in the slot at 6'4", 203 pounds. So whether it's an outside guy, whether it's a slot guy, whether it's a tight end, Indiana just needs a pass catcher. That's how I'm going to put it. They need a pass catcher in the portal, one with experience. We know Kurt Cignetti likes experience, but somebody that can be plug and play. They can play multiple different roles. If you need them to go beat somebody deep, they can do that. If you need them to be able to get himself open underneath, I think you got to have a guy that's versatile as a pass catcher, whether it's at the tight end spot, whether it's in the slot, out wide. I think pass catcher, whether, again, wide receiver or tight end, Indiana will have to go out and look for some help there in the portal.
Well, I appreciate both you guys jumping on here with me this evening, and I'm very appreciative of that, and also being a part of the Hoosier.com. Look forward to collaborating with you guys. You guys do a tremendous job there on site, and make sure that you're checking out the recruiting aspect to get a chance to jump into it. But a couple big-time recruits will be in town tomorrow night as well, and that's one thing that Indiana's had most the opportunity this year is knocking on some doors of 4 stars and 5 stars. So there'll be some guys in attendance tomorrow night that Indiana does have a legit shot at. And but I appreciate you guys jumping on here this evening, and we'll do it again sometime.
Absolutely. I appreciate it.
Well, there you go. That's appreciate Zach and Alec joining me here this evening, as well as those of you on the different platforms, be it Facebook, YouTube, X, or wherever it may be. I'm very appreciative of you guys taking time out of your night to join me here on the Hoosier Football Tailgate. All I can say is this is going to be a lot of fun this year. We're going to do a lot of different things. I'm going to do some more with the video aspect, especially in the recruiting realm, of breaking some guys down and maybe providing some of the insights as to why Indiana has an interest in so-and-so. Going to start out with Brody McCorder, the quarterback out of Georgia. So be looking for that shortly as well. And, but again, tomorrow night, 8:00, Memorial Stadium, a lot of festivities going on. We will be having a post-game wrap-up as well. And if we happen to see me running around there, by all means, tap me on the shoulder and introduce yourself. Be glad to meet some of you guys for stopping by tonight. But until then, this is the coach, Shannon Griffith, and you've been watching the Hoosier Football Tailgate on thehoosier.com. Good night, everybody.